meat from Houston, Texas. And so I'm like, okay, and we're beef producers. And we're producing it in our own backyards. Let's eat Montana beef. Right? Huge problems to go from commodity beef product in the school system to a Montana-grown beef product. Both rules and regulations from the slaughter plants to who's going to deliver it, and so lots and lots of problem solving took place. But it is now processed by Bear Paw Meat and delivered by Bear Paw Meat to our door in order to solve some of these logistic problems, because we're a long ways from any distributor, and distributors don't want to come to tiny schools in eastern Montana. Right, so we've had to do a lot of problem solving over the years. One example is like we could grow beets like crazy, and the cook was like, I'm not working with them. And I'm like, what? We've got buckets and buckets of beets. And she was like, well, the kids won't eat them. And I'm like, let's try, right? I told her, I says, if they won't eat them, I'll come back to the cafeteria, gather them all up, and I'll compost them all if they won't eat them. If I had to convince her to cook them, she cooked them. And that afternoon, I usually swing by the cafeteria to see how their day went, to be a supporting person, you know. And she was come at me, and she's like, Patty, I gotta admit, I gotta apologize. I says, about what? And she says, they ate the beets. And I'm like, Joyce, I knew they were gonna eat the beets. They grew the beets. They washed the beets. They delivered the beets. They're gonna eat the beets. And so anything those kids touch and work on and grow, it's going to increase the amount that they're going to consume. The best thing that we did for success, I think, is asking the kids for surveys on how they liked the meal or the harvest of the month, whichever it was. But we've moved to real meals now and not just the harvest of the month, because like the harvest of the month, we're incorporated into the menu. So like they might have beef 3 times in a month, and so we just let them know that this is the beef month or whatever. So we're not doing an individual taste test, but when we have the beef, then she'll have a survey for them to say what they liked about it or whatever, you know. And they also get to pick out when we serve a new meal, like we had chicken fried steak the other day, which is a brand new product. And so when she puts something new on the menu, something's got to come off the menu, right? And so I asked her, I says, why don't you survey the kids to find out, let them rank them top to bottom, their favorite dishes. And then they know what the bottom one is, because that bottom one, we're throwing it into the containers for food waste. We want them to eat it. So if we take that bottom one off and replace it with something they really like, then that's a win-win. And so the kids get to vote on those meals, and so they were confused if chicken fried steak was beef or chicken, but after a little education, they know it's beef. And they still ask why, but that's okay. They ate it and they liked it. So then it moved up the ladder in the surveying ranks. And so eventually, if you do it long enough and you keep surveying, you'll get meals that the kids really like and they'll eat them.
Yeah. Jay, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more as a food service director, how you kind of go about introducing new foods, thinking about foods that might end up being wasted. If you could just talk a little bit more about that.
I think just introducing new foods into the menu is basically keeping an open mind and also seeing what's available locally. I've definitely had farmers contact me with an abundance of a certain crop or something, and you know they're offering such a good price or sometimes free that you just put it in there, you know, whether it's cucumbers and you're turning it into a cucumber salad, or just keeping an open mind, trying new things, trying to keep up on trends. The surveys work really well, asking kids what their favorite meals are. Cooking classes, I'm lucky now to have Whitney doing a lot of cooking classes, and so she's introducing, you know, kales and, you know, things that if they saw on the menu, they probably wouldn't eat. But if they were able to participate in cooking it at a small little level, then putting it on the menu, I think we're kind of just starting to do that kind of thing. I think that's going to help a lot, introduce new ideas. What was this great question?
Yeah. Oh, no, one's are there any audience questions?
I've got one.
Yeah, go for it.
We've got our school garden in Polson, but we haven't put anything other than our Harvest of the Month taste tests on the food menu. So is there any kickback that you've gotten with school garden produce versus things that you've had to purchase that have gone through whatever testing or whatever certifications? Like, have you had any issues with having the school garden food being served in the lunchroom?
Do you think Jay or me?
Yeah, with us being a food service director.
Like in terms of like good, like
food safety.
Food safety.
Yeah.
No, we haven't run into any issues yet. And I mean, there's guidelines to follow. That when I would go, I'd initially visit farmers, you would go through a checklist, and you were checking where their wastewater is going and where the animals are located, preferably below, at a lower point than the vegetables. But no, from school gardens, not yet. We are doing more of it, in school, on school grounds now. So we're in the process of developing our own policies, but haven't had any issues yet.
When I first started in Big Fork and Cayuse Prairie, we called our sanitarian because it can vary, and our sanitarian did not care. It's like, sure, go ahead, do that. So it can be worth checking in on that. And GAP, which is Good Agricultural Practices, is actually a very simple way of ensuring that the food that you're growing is safe. So at its most basic, it's making sure people are washing their hands. It's making sure that there are bathroom facilities so that people are not going near the garden. It's making sure that, things are rinsed with water that's potable. It can be very simple. And so, like, when Jay is working with a farmer, and Jay has relationships with most of the farmers that he purchases from, but at some point he'll make sure that they hit these criteria, which is the same that any distributor, where you're getting food from, all those farms have to go through those same processes. But what's nice about local food is you can see it. You can go to the farm, you can see your own garden, and you can know what's going on there. So from a traceability standpoint, it's actually safer to get food from a school garden because you can know exactly who touched that food the whole time. You can know exactly what went into that garden and when it went in, so especially for manure or other things. So we've had good success with having garden produce in the cafeteria. One limiting factor can be quantity. A lot of our schools are serving so much food to so many kids that maybe you can't grow all this spinach, but it can be so effective for kids. Like, we harvested these cherry tomatoes, and so, it's a portion of the cherry tomatoes we served that day, but it can be so effective for kids actually taking a cherry tomato or actually taking that salad. So we haven't had any trouble with it, and I've done that. Kalispell does it, or has done it. Big Fork, Summers, Cayuse Prairie. So you can definitely do it. It's worth making sure that your food service director and food service staff are on board, and making sure, hands are washed and some of that basic stuff.
Because you guys do it just right from harvest directly into the kitchen, which is amazing.
Yeah, well, we worked with the sanitarian in the beginning to know the rules and regulations and have the kids know if that's the case.
I think there was a couple other,
Jay, a question for you. How did you go about, as far as, I'm assuming you had to get administrative approval to do the dirt rich, and how did you show that that was going to be beneficial versus, there was a cost, I'm sure, to the school for them picking up versus trash from the,
Right. It was actually, if I remember right, I've been doing it for years, it was initiated by a high school group called Free Flow. In our high school, it's kind of an environmental organization that does things. It was kind of initiated by them, and so one of their advisors went and asked if we would be on board and participate in it, but they actually got the approval. And at the beginning, I had extra money, because we weren't sure how much it was going to cost, and so I said, well, I think I have enough money to fund it for 6 months.
Just from the food service budget.
Just
Right.
from the food service budget, right? And then after they saw that it was really minimal, kind of the district just absorbs it now. I mean, I'm not sure what the bill is. I don't even see the bill anymore, but I don't think it's $40 a month. It's not very much.
If Alyssa was here, she
Oh,
would.
yeah, she
Yeah, straight away.
So it was just something that evolved, and like all good projects, hopefully, they get taken over by other people, and then it just happens. That's it. So.
Yeah, and I know in Big Fork we made that initial inquiry, and Alyssa was willing to come down and talk to the administration and, talk costs and things like that. And I know at first it's a little bit further, so it may cost a little bit more than Whitefish just because she had to travel further. But like you're saying, if you can get, even if Big Fork and Swan both were doing it, or some other businesses in Big Fork are doing it, it's worth their effort to come down and pick it up.
When I did hear, they were just talking to a couple businesses and individuals in Big Fork, and if there are enough people who want to be part of it, they can totally make it worth it, so.
Yeah, I spoke with her, so I was just curious though, as far as,
Right.
because it was student initiated versus
Right.
you initiating it, and if your administration is open to newfangled ideas such as that, so.
Right. I think one financial selling point could be, and I haven't taken it this far, that if you do a food waste project and determine how much food is getting thrown out every day, and taking that away from the garbage bins, then ultimately you can have the garbage truck come fewer times, because you're decreasing that amount in the bin. So there could be an offset. The dump truck, or the garbage truck only has to come twice a week instead of 3, so it could save us 33% of that cost.
And our disadvantage is that the maintenance crew actually takes the trash to the dump.
So you could be
That's
cutting-
labor.
It's
Still
still
one less
labor,
thing that
yes.
maybe one less thing they have to
cutting
do,
their
yeah.
hours. I mean,
Yeah.
they could
Right.
spend their time doing more important things than driving trash to the dump. I don't know.
Right.
Could be a
Thank
selling
you.
point.
Yeah.
And one way to get around with the ed is we have a wellness committee, right? So that
We do.
wellness committee is supposed to be meeting, I don't know, they ask me quarterly or something?
Yeah, it's on the
Supposed
school,
to.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyhow, I make sure the admin is on the committee. And so then they are understanding what the problems are and how we're solving them, who is doing what, and what we're attempting to do. And usually try to get your student council president to be on that committee too. Gives a student voice, so that will swing a pretty good bat for, especially when we move to good food instead of poor food.
Are there any other audience questions? I was actually wondering about kind of the sustainability of like the food waste mindfulness, that practices that you kind of did. It sounds like you did something that's more sustainable a little bit. And is that still going on, Joe? In your school, like just that is, so you're still doing that composting, correct?
Mhm.
And then at KMS, when you noticed it with the 6th graders and you did that project, and did you do that at the beginning of the year, middle year, and?
First year we did it in the fall, and then the second year it happened in the spring.
Did you see an improvement in food waste and just how students, like, throughout the whole year beyond that competition?
Yeah.
Does it carry up to 7th and 8th grade?
A little bit, and then so the share bin that is in the cafeteria for 6th, 7th, and 8th, and we did notice after the project that kids would put more food up in there, and then by the end of the day, more kids knew that there was extra food there to grab, so the hungry kids were able to grab those.
When could they grab that food?
When?
Yeah.
Anytime during lunch. So if a kid had an apple and then 5 minutes later after they were done they ate fast, they put the apple in there, and then it was kind of free to anyone. So if a kid noticed the apple up there, another kid could walk up and grab it.
Was it only during lunch that they could take
yeah.
from the sherbet? Do you notice, as you're doing this evaluation, that it's a lot of fruits, like vegetables that are wasted? Or are they eating mainly the meat and the bread? And they're wasting the vegetables and fruits if they don't know where they're harvested from? Or is there any discrepancy in that? Or is it just kind of hodgepodge of like food waste?
Some of it depends meal to meal. Like some of what Patty is saying, like there are fruits and vegetables that kids love, and like no question they want to eat. And sometimes we try out something new or something that kids are not familiar with, and so sometimes that is what it is. But I would say it really varies. Sometimes on the quality of what the kids are getting, and it varies. It's not always the vegetable. It's not always the.
Well, and our school have the salad bars, which I feel like cuts down on that food waste because kids get to choose what vegetables and fruits they take, and I think that is super valuable. So they're not going to take a bunch of vegetables. They're not going to eat. They might take 3 carrots and they're going to eat the 3 carrots.
Yeah, and when the kids harvest the kale, take the kale to the kitchen and ask them to make kale chips, you can guarantee they did not harvest enough kale because it's going to go like wildfire. The elementary eat first and they just wipe it out, where the older kids don't even get to taste it, let alone eat it.
That's awesome.
So it's just as a matter of what it is and how much they like it. So.
The other thing to your question is, I think in school, kids are really used to systems and structure, and so at the beginning of the year, yeah, it takes some time to say like, oh, the goats don't eat your milk carton. That's not what goes in the tub. But then they get it. And so sure, every so often something is in there, but they really get it. It takes a couple of weeks to really make sure that all the education is there, especially with the new kids or the kindergartners, but then the bins are just there, and the kids know how it works. And so they, in that sense, like, do have a pretty good mindfulness about what goes where.
Yeah. And we would have our, my 5th grade class, that would be part of one of their science grades. We would learn about the my plates and balance, and then about composting. And then one of their jobs was to prepare a presentation. And they would go down to the kindergarten, 1st grade classes and talk to them about the importance of all of those foods, and then also about how the composting system works. And that was, they were graded by me about their presentation, and then, they helped out later.
It was cool. I think that Cecilia brought up a really interesting point about kind of the sustainability of projects, and I know that we had some varying lengths. Like I know Jay's, obviously the composting is something ongoing. Patty's obviously a project that is very much ongoing. I was wondering if each of you could maybe just touch on in our last 5 minutes, very briefly, on the sustainability and kind of, how you went about that and decided whether to do a larger scale, more long-term project versus a small kind of, like what Caitlin did, week-long or shorter-term project. Whoever wants to start.
Something I would say is that so often to get local food or farm to school or composting, so often you have a champion in the school system. And so maybe it's a Jay who's the food service director, maybe it's a Patty who is a teacher, or maybe it's a food corps service member who's only there for a year, or maybe it's Michelle who just loves all science and all the connections and being able to have her kids involved in so many. And so while that's really great, because a champion can make things happen and can put in the work and the time, what's not great about that is if you have one champion, sometimes when that champion leaves, the project falls apart. And I've certainly seen that happen. And so it's always really important to try to get, like at Kalispell Middle School, a lot of teachers like the program. And so if one of those teachers leaves, it's still going to happen. It's not dependent on that one person. And so I think that's really important. Something that we did in Kalispell at that Central Kitchen Garden is that we brought in a nonprofit that works with youth, CryJ, to do the maintenance on that garden and to do all the composting, and that was necessary. That garden is really big and it's a production garden. The whole goal is to grow a lot of food, and we didn't have the champions in the school to make sure that was happening, but for CryJ that worked so well with their programming and with their kids. So by bringing in that nonprofit, that program is still going on, and I don't think it would be still going on if we didn't have that outside support. So for us, it's really about, making sure that there are multiple stakeholders, and then in Jay's case, like Whitefish doesn't qualify for food court, so Jay found space in the budget to have an educator. And so, I guess like finding the people and finding the ways to make sure that'll keep happening is a huge challenge. But if you do it, it can really work.
Right. And in Big Fork, we're really lucky finding some people from the community. So Monterey comes and helps us in our school garden, getting things set up, setting up the watering system and things like that in the garden. And then we also have another master gardener. I think the senior community in any community, right? We have a gal that just loves to garden, and that's she would be there every day if we let her to. And how we coordinated is, there's some teachers that just don't feel confident in teaching some of the gardening things. So she actually has worked with some of those teachers that, this is another one of our master gardeners, Elizabeth. If that we identified one grade level that wasn't super confident, so now she goes in once a week and leads lessons in the classroom with their support and kind of co-teaches with them. So that's, and so now she's there, whether or not the teachers change, we have those master gardeners that help us in the garden, which has been great.
I was thinking about our composting program throughout the cafeteria, and I feel like it was really fun to share the problems we had. So like, okay, we have this compost bin, how are we gonna get it to the garden to dump it? And just talking to different school community members, and then, we had our counselor who was like, hey, I have a kid who needs something to do at the time of the day, and he can do that. And just like having those opportunities and giving them, like, I think a lot of our life skills kids help out in the cafeteria, but I feel like that would be like an easy plug to make that sustainable. And then they just started a farm to school program, a farm to table class in our family consumer science class at the middle school. And so now we have like a whole class of kids that would be interested in taking the compost bin up to the garden. So it's like a very easy, nice fix.
All right. I think that we're exactly 3:15. Are there any last final questions? If not, I think you're welcome to come and talk to any of these wonderful people.
Thank you.
Thank you.